Greetings and welcome back to another discussion on my channel. I guess we could call this Perspectives. Today I am here with the now famous and infamous in some circles, Kraut and Tea. He is a YouTuber. I first became familiar with him when he was very small, and he's grown tremendously, has now over 100,000 subscribers. I don't really want to pigeonhole him. I'm not sure. You are, I guess, just a political commentator, or you're not an anti-feminist, are you? I mean, a lot of.
I don't really know how to categorize myself. I mean, in recent months, I had more and more the inkling of. I think we talked about this in the beginning when we first met. I always wanted to direct my channel towards going after Islam itself and going after the influence that Islam has had on the European continent, its negative aspects and so forth. But every time I tried doing that, it is always the leftists that kept pulling me back into attacking them due to their defenses of that fucking death cult. And it's become really annoying, but I really do intend to push my channel into that direction, but I'm unfortunately kept getting hindered by it. But it will be something more of that kind of content in the future.
I suppose it's difficult to classify certain things because there tends to be a lot of crossover between different YouTubers covering, anti-feminist. I guess the term cultural libertarian is used pretty often. I don't know if that would apply to you, but there's definitely a kind of domain that you would move in, and it doesn't really matter, I suppose. I'm not particularly classifiable myself. So today we're going to be talking for the audience about the AFD, the Alternative for Germany, or Alternative für Deutschland, because in the not super distant future there will be an election, and a lot of people don't know much about it. Now, I think this is particularly relevant and on point because of the election, which is going to be happening in a few days. Well, the first part of the election in France, I think it's on the 24th or 23rd. And what happened in the Netherlands, or rather what didn't happen. And of course, I have my own ideas, but there have been small trends, or maybe tremors, in the direction of populism in Europe. And I certainly have my own views of how that would work in Germany. But here we have the expert who's very much keeps up to date.
I wouldn't call me an expert.
Well, you keep up to date, at least more so than I do in politics. I think I do pay attention, but not as much as I perhaps should if I want to talk about these things with any sense of
I've honestly fallen a bit into despair, to be honest, with recent political developments. I already told you in private that I'm leaving Germany.
Right.
I do kind of see things going increasingly into a more and more sinister direction, and I don't see the potential for change.
Can you qualify sinister there? What do you mean by that?
Sinister in the sense of that the status quo is, in my opinion, due to be continued, even though the status quo is non-desirable, absolutely undesirable. And I've started asking questions about the way we set up politics in Germany in general. Because the one thing you can say about the AFD, especially during the last year, its creation and its arrival on the political German scene, is they had massive success on the regional, board. In various states, they gained up to 15-16% on occasions, marched into the new parliaments, and actually made themselves a viable coalition partner for conservative parties in Germany. The problem, however, is that the conservative party is currently in Germany dominated by forces which are trying to moderate and liberalize the Conservative Party, making it less and less conservative, and as a result, there will probably not be a coalition between the AFD and the Conservatives. And I believe that with the next election, it is very unlikely to see, more increasingly unlikely at the very least, to see a overwhelming AFD success. I believe they will get 12% at the very least. That's something I'm convinced of, which is something that would make them a viable coalition partner for the Conservative Party. But I don't see the Conservative Party, which is by now let's just say it as it is Merkel's party. She runs that party as her family property, and she will never step down. And her castrated minions will not have the balls to stand up to her, to kick out and go a little more.
I think it's a good point. I think you can see a similar thing that might happen in France, that in order to get anything done in most of these countries, there needs to be a kind of broad coalition. And a lot of the AFD is not going to find friends anytime soon. I don't think they can just go their own way and say, well, look at me, we can do all of this stuff. I think they'll be influential, but yeah, I would agree with you. I think the direction Germany's been going in, it's pretty stale. At least on the ground. We were just talking privately.
There's a question that has been going around my head, which I might ask you and your audience if they'd care to comment.
Yeah, sure.
Doesn't this situation that we have in Europe right now just point out the benefits of the English parliamentary system? Because, we have to constantly govern through coalitions. You will never get completely what you want. You always have to compromise and work with others. Whilst, for example, in the United Kingdom during the 1980s, when they had state socialist programs and all that kind of nonsense, nationalized industries, a recipe for economic and social disaster. And they elected a government with Margaret Thatcher, who just on a whim, within a few years, managed to turn it all around. Because through the representative system, you are very well capable to implement.
Well, not everyone liked that, I should add. But
not everyone liked it, but at least it shows that within the UK, the Australian, and even the United States and Canadian system of parliamentary representation, you are more capable of just implementing the reforms that are required rather than constantly compromising.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it really depends on your perspective. I mean, you could look at this as a sort of historical consequence of the 20th century, where you did have a lot of unilateralism, and particularly look at National Socialism, in the case of Germany. I mean, whatever opposition or differences were squashed out rather early. I mean, certainly if you want to get things done and follow a certain political track, then yeah, I think a parliamentary system would be better. But I could imagine someone playing devil's advocate, or someone favoring the more continental system, saying, well, yeah, you have to build coalitions, but this encourages cooperation, and in the end you can get more done.
Yeah, there's always positives and negatives to everything. I for example, there's no accountability in Germany. That is one negative aspect. And in the sense of accountability, what I mean is every British citizen has a representative in their parliament. And if they have a problem with the direction that the country is going, they're part of a constituency. They can always call up their representative and say, I don't like the course you're taking. Whilst the only thing that we have here is, at best, we can call up a party headquarter and talk to some nobody at a phone reception and tell them, I don't like the way you're going. But in the end, the only thing we can do is vote for a different party. Yeah. So I do concede also that the cooperation between parties is kind of good within our system, but I also dislike, for example, the lack of accountability. I believe there is this very distinctive lack of accountability within German politics. Politicians in Germany tend to...
It's very stale, I think, too.
Not just stale, it's this false sense of virtuousness and authority. I think a good example for that is Heiko Maas, the Minister of Justice, who, if you look at his statements and so forth, he behaves like some bloody king. He really does. How dare you criticize me? I'm the Minister of Justice. I'm in charge here. The people who run our country, the people who go into our political systems, who become our leaders, who become our political leaders, they, after a time, start behaving as if they were unaccountable to anyone, precisely because that accountability kind of is missing within our system.
Yeah, and I think, as we were talking about before, the general political apathy of Germans is pretty astounding. I can't think of any other group of European people off the top of my head that I'm familiar with that are just so detached from. I mean, whether that's a good or bad thing, certainly it makes for easy company. But
I think it is part of a wider problem. We touched on that, institutionalism, the German institutionalism, the blind trust that Germans have in institutions, that they believe that institutions always run things better anyway, and the lack of outside of the box thinking.
Yeah.
Germans are not inclined to be entrepreneurs, not just in a political sense, but also in a business sense. There's a distinctive lack of creativity in that regard. And I believe it is a legacy of the Prussian unification and of the Prussian mindset that was implemented across Germany. People might disagree with me on that. And I believe it has very negative consequences for a country. The blind trust in institutions always shows itself when, for example, measures to restrict free speech and measures to clamp down on online freedoms and so forth are widely not even criticized within the German public, because apparently institutions know better. And it's a bit of an off-the-topic thing. There's, for example, this new YouTube channel called Funk, which is supposed to be some kind of silly wordplay, funk or whatever, which is the public broadcasting services of Germany. They established this YouTube channel and they pay various YouTubers to make videos for it. It's supposed to be the kind of, hey, now we have this hipsterish, new broadcasting thing on YouTube. And the problem that I found with it was that not only were the people uncritical of it, but a lot of YouTubers in Germany just signed up willingly, kind of along the lines of, yeah, the institution knows better. And that kind of mindset, even though what I mentioned is off topic and more YouTube related, that mindset of the institution knows better. Oh, I can have more success through working through a government or other kind of establishment institution. That is very persistent within Germany. And nobody here, or at least very, very few people, actually find the courage of working outside of institutions, of working for themselves, on going on their own. And this kind of entrepreneurial mindset is really lacking. And it's very disappointing, because we are a country of a lot of potential, and that potential is simply untapped.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all the time I've spent in Germany, apart from universities, I think I've heard one conversation about something related to politics. Now, I'm not actually going to say if that's a good or bad thing, but it is very telling. Yeah, I was just relating this story before to Kraut about something that happened years and years ago in a German city, about 12 years ago, and it was I think a weekday. I was a student, or I think I was doing postgrad. Anyway, didn't really matter. 3 a.m. in the morning, not a car in sight, very small city. So I'm there with a friend of mine from England at the time, and we just crossed the street, and all the Germans are just standing there behind us, and they're kind of giving us these looks. And he kind of jokingly turned around and said, "Well, that's how Hitler came to power," in the sense that this sort of blind obedience and devotion to the institutional. It's definitely there. You can observe it.
Yeah, it's damaging to us, and you can also see it, harking back to our political discussion. I believe you can see it within the appearance of the AFD. I just said mistakenly reappearance, because I see the AFD not as a new thing on our political scale, because when you read through the AFD party program, it is the party program of the CSU, of the Conservative Bavarian Party of the 1990s. It is just a reappearance of traditional social conservatism, which was kind of eradicated by Merkel, who tried desperately to liberalize and modernize the Conservative Party, and ended up creating this weird social democratic thing, almost social democratic thing. And the institutionalism that I'm talking of shows itself in that respect, that all the establishment institutions, including the media, and as well as the old party political system and so forth, they look on this new appearance with a disdain that is really just uncomfortable. New parties I don't see anywhere else in Europe a new political party being treated in that kind of miserable way. It is that kind of treatment that the AFD kind of received over the past year that made them more sympathetic to me. It's not as much the things that they propose, but the way they've been treated, the dishonesty, the slimy, disgusting way in which there are attempts to brand them as this kind of Nazi party, when in fact they're just a social conservative movement, a Protestant social conservative movement, which is kind of new, because the social conservative movements, right-wing conservative movements here, traditionally came out of Catholic lands. And yes, You remember Petri, the party leader,
yes.
when she announced, I think it was an interview she gave, where I think she just remarked that Germany had the right to station troops at its border, which would open fire at anyone illegally entering the country. And there was this massive uproar about this comment, kind of saying, oh yes, Petri wants to massacre and genocide refugees and whatnot. Mm-hmm. When in the end she just stated a fact, because yes, it is a right. It is within the laws of Germany. A German government does indeed have the right to station troops at the border and to shoot at anyone illegally entering the country. This kind of theatrical over-dramatization of things. And if you take an honest look at the AFD, they are in no way a kind of neo-fascist movement. What they are is a libertarian, right-wing, Protestant tradition conservative party. I would say that they are the UKIP of Germany, even though they are somewhat more moderate, more tame than UKIP itself. It is in no way a dangerous political presence, and it is in fact a political presence which I believe should be welcomed in Germany, because that is a voice that has been missing from the parliamentary discourse now for 20 years, 30 years, ever since Merkel took over.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that to the outside observer that I mean, German politics are just insanely stale and have not been really moving. There's a lot of stale gridlock, and it just doesn't. I actually am almost sympathetic towards certain to Germans. Like, who would want to be interested in these types of politics if you were, because it's so fucking boring, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, when was the last big political shakeup in Germany? Was it Schröder when he kept us out of the Iraq War? That's probably the only thing.
Yeah.
That was probably the last big shakeup. Shakeups here hardly ever happen. And the thing is that this institutionalism that we spoke about earlier, it profits off this, it benefits off this, and it thrives upon stagnation and so forth. And I don't see a movement coming up anytime soon in Germany which would actually try to challenge that stagnation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it would require a fundamental change of the I guess the cultural landscape, if you will.
Yeah, and I don't see that happening anytime, unfortunately. I do believe that there's a rekindling of certain kind of, you take a look, for example, at the youth in Germany, and you will recognize that a lot of them tend to be moving into conservative directions. Mm. You see a rekindling of German national identity to a certain degree. I believe in 20 years' time or something, there might be something developing out of this. But right now, at this moment, I just see stagnation continuing. What will come out of this is probably another conservative social democratic coalition or social democratic conservative coalition that will start up next year. And it's not exactly a bright prospect. It's not something that I would be looking forward to, because no matter if it is a social democratic chancellor or a conservative chancellor, what it would mean in the end is just the status quo being continued.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's that is just the reason why Germany's probably going to get worse and worse over time, because it's not nobody I think thinks of the AFD or Patriot like they do in terms of, I don't know, Le Pen in France or what have you. They're just, people are just really disengaged.
Well, Le Pen, the thing about Le Pen is the passions that are out of it. The reason why Le Pen isn't as revolutionary as many people think is, I believe a lot of people just refuse to read.
Not at all, in my opinion.
A lot of people refuse to read for her economic positions, which are basically they're 1970s state socialism.
Oh yeah, she's a complete socialist. Yeah,
it's absolute nonsense.
It's basically socialism. Yeah, it's 1970s French socialism. There's no.
Oh, not French. It's the same thing that the Brits did during the 60s and 70s.
Well, yeah, but the French tend to latch on and to hold on to their socialist ideals a lot more, which is why I said French. I mean, they don't have issues with socioeconomic policies that remind you of that or reminiscent of that. It's more well, they just want it for France, or they want the jobs back. I saw an interesting sort of mini documentary of about an entire region in France. I'm trying to recall the name of it. It's next to the Belgian border, or it's northeast. Basically, a lot of former mining industry. The mines have shut down, and of course, as is predictable, the Front National was able to capture quite a lot of the populace there. It's just, I don't really see. There's nothing revolutionary about Le Pen for that reason, the reason you mentioned, but also the reason that this is just, the old populist strategy. Someone's in the doldrums economically. Let's just, pick them up and say we're going to do this and that, and everyone is going to get along. Okay, well, fair enough. But
two-thirds of all working French people work for the government.
Yeah.
And this is a process that has been going on for years. The entire energy sector is under national control and so forth. And when I look at a situation like the situation in France, the thing that goes to my mind is, well, maybe that's the problem. It's not. I actually am convinced by now that that's the problem. What the French need right now, economically speaking, socially speaking, I kind of tend to agree with the Front National that there is a large Muslim migration problem. Only a fool would deny that it exists. But economically speaking, what the French really need is a market liberalization, a privatization of massive national industries, a lowering of taxes, an opening to foreign investment. The French have government institutions that exist to limit the adaptation of English and foreign words into its language. This is silly. I'm sorry, this is just silly. France needs to become part of the free market more. Needs to be more open to trade.
Well,
and it's not doing it.
I don't really think that's going to happen, right? It's clear.
Oh, it's not. It's not going to happen. We already know it's not going to happen. But it is what should happen, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, sure. Lots of things should happen. Merkel shouldn't have offered an invitation to millions of people from all kinds of dodgy places in the world. Pretty much it shouldn't have happened, but.
Yeah, it's good to surrender to just to look back at those things and think about what should have happened. But yeah, I think I made my point in France. And it's interesting. You probably noticed this yourself in the media, how the Germans like to compare the AFD to the Front National, even though they have pretty much nothing in common. Absolutely nothing.
Well, they're very. As you pointed out, they're very sort of classical liberal. The AFD, the Front National, is just. They want to get out of the EU so they can maintain their own socialist policies, yeah. Yeah.
No, well, the AFD isn't as much. I don't know if I can call them classical liberal, because when you
I didn't say. I said they're more like that than the Front National. They're not classical liberals, but they're more similar to that.
It's an interesting thing in the regard of, the term preußische Werte, Prussian values.
Sure.
It's a reference term. It's not something that you accuse someone of. It's something. It describes a cultural aspect of North German Protestant conservatism. I think the best thing you can compare it to is probably Scottish Presbyterianism, or maybe small town conservative Protestant communities in the southern United States, maybe in places like Georgia and Alabama, not as evangelical and so forth, but this kind of neat, calm, conservative, very reserved, very much about your own four walls, about family values and so forth, sticking to yourself, well behaved. This kind of conservatism has simmered under the surface in Germany. We all knew that it existed, but it never really found a place to speak out politically. It never found a political voice. And I believe the AFD, because conservatism in Germany, very social conservatism, was always reserved to the Catholic sphere here. It was always a Catholic party. It was always Catholic conservatism that dominated. You had the main conservative, social conservative figures in Germany came out of Bavaria. They came out of Cologne. They came out of Baden-Württemberg. They came out of the Catholic dominant South. And this newfound Protestant conservatism, which stands in opposition to the Catholic conservatism, I think, You see, that it's what I'm trying to get at is it's something new. It's something we haven't had in this country for a very long time. And it's going to be interesting to see how it will impact this country. But at the same time, I don't believe that the impact will come immediately. It will probably take years, if not
Well, you'll
decades.
be gone by then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that Germany is just going to be. Well, I just think it's going to go down the tubes further and further. Nothing's going to change. It's just too much history, I think. And
I think if things start biting the regular citizen, and I think they will.
Well, I mean, yes. I don't think they'd be openly vocal about it. It's like a French colleague of mine that I occasionally talk to, who runs a hamburger joint. But your average French person isn't, chanting Front National. On the other hand, they are tired of trucks of peace and a lot of the issues that confront Europe on the whole with regards to Islam, and so sort of casting a silent vote, like a lot of people did in the United States. There were a lot of people at the time of the election of Trump who didn't vocally say, hey, look at me, I'm voting for Trump, but they did so quietly, and maybe they wouldn't even admit it now. Whatever. I mean, I'm not going to comment on Trump himself, but they voted for an alternative, basically, and that could happen sometime somewhere down the line where people are quiet in public, but secretly in their own heads and minds, they could vote differently than they traditionally have done so.
It's not just the terrorist and migrant situation; it's also the financial bite that is without a doubt going to come. Did you see the first estimates of how much the migrant and refugee crisis is going to cost a taxpayer?
No, I've not yet looked. I don't want to get more depressed than I already am.
Would you like to take a guess?
Well, no. You can.
It's a third of the Greek national debt.
Okay.
Yeah, it's you're going to
pay. I always thought it would pay for itself with all that skilled labor and tax revenue that's going to come in.
Oh yeah, that was the most amazing part when even the German media had to admit that. I think the Spiegel was the first to admit, yeah, actually, most of these people are completely uneducated. I mean, I think it's 40% of all Afghans who enter the country can't even read or write. So it's going to cost a third of the Greek national debt. And you've heard of the Minister of Finance of his privatization drive, haven't you?
Yeah.
Because he, for your audience who don't understand this, who might not know about this, our Minister of Finance he's a towering and very intimidating figure in German politics. He has been around since the Helmut Kohl era, since the 80s. He's a very old brand. He belongs to that 1980s Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan type of conservatism. Extremely fiscally conservative. And I mean, really extremely fiscally conservative. And his stance on the finances of the nation have been, there will be no new debt. There will be, balanced books. And that has been his extremely strict line throughout his entire tenure as Minister of Finance. And he is stuck to this line almost religiously. There will be no new debt. And confronted with the potential cost of the migrant and refugee crisis, his line has been, there will be no new debts, even if I have to privatize the Autobahn, the national highways. And he's actually drawn up plans to privatize the highways. Of course, he will also do massive cutbacks in the fields of, healthcare, the welfare net, and so forth, education and science. But consistently, when he does that, he consistently says, yes, this is due to the migrant refugee crisis. I don't care how much you are pro open borders and so forth. I don't care how much you want to implement these policies. My authority as the finance minister and my position as the finance minister dictate me to enforce that there will be no new debt and that the books will be balanced. And it's that kind of position, because that kind of position does exist in Germany, will probably make the bite come for the ordinary citizen.
Yeah. I mean, what do you estimate the timeline for all of this is? I mean, it really depends on who you talk to, but Some people.
I think we will have more trucks of peace.
Well, for sure. I mean
that will definitely sting. And combined with the new trucks of peace, we will probably have a lot of economic woes. A lot of economic woes. I mean, the cutbacks. I mean, a third of the Greek national debt. Can you imagine what else we could have spent that money on? And that money is going to be squeezed out of the average German citizen, nonetheless. We will have to pay for this.
Yeah. I think it's going to be, at the very least, very difficult for your average German who just does his work and goes home to keep his head in the sand.
And the funny thing is that I saw this calculation on some right-wing blog, so I'm not entirely sure how trustworthy it is, but deporting all these people back will also cost a fifth of the Greek national debt. It isn't as much, but it would also be a tremendous cost. And I believe that the average German citizen, when he starts feeling the continuous bites, of social cutbacks and so forth, he will probably start changing his mind even faster. He might have been anti-open borders from the beginning, but he will actually potentially even be more vocal about his opposition to things.
Yeah. Why? And this is the problem. There's basically no solution.
There is. The deportation process can actually work. We actually know
how would you do this? I've talked about this before. You would have to essentially get these people at gunpoint.
Not necessarily. There's an interesting development that happened over the recent years. It's a study. I need to find that study again and send it to you. It's not as much a study as a report. Okay. Some of these people will go back on their own if you give them 400 euros. That's literally it.
That's some of these fairly people, cheap, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, throughout the last year, I think it was throughout the period of like 5 or 6 months, 400 Iraqis left Germany every day. And the reason why that happened was because they were given money. They were paid the flight back home and they were given 500 euros or 400 euros. And they took that money and went back.
Yeah.
So there's always pragmatic solutions to everything, in my opinion. It doesn't necessarily have to be at gunpoint. I believe some of these people will also go home as soon as you make them realize, well, if you rape someone here, you're going to go to prison.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that's a very optimistic view. I think we'd probably need more case studies, if you want to call them that, of people saying,
I think there's also more that the government can do, but is too weak and too soft to do. You remember the Berlin terrorist attack?
Yeah.
The suspect being a Tunisian, and that Tunisian was due to be deported. And the reason why he wasn't deported was because the Tunisian government had completely just refused to cooperate with German authorities and didn't provide the documentation that would have proven that he was a Tunisian citizen. They did that on purpose to clog up the process and prevent that person from being deported back to Tunisia, because it would have been more work for the Tunisian government. They would get back some welfare, somebody, and so forth. The Tunisian government has an incentive to not cooperate with Germany in the deportation of Tunisian citizens. And it was almost like I felt really pissed by this. It was really one of the most sinister things I've seen in ages, that literally hours after the terrorist attack occurred and after the suspect was nailed, after it became clear who the suspect was, it took the Tunisian government only hours to find the documentation that proved that he was a Tunisian citizen. So that incident clearly just showed that the Tunisian government was just messing around with the German government. And what I meant to say with the notion that the German government could actually do things is the German government could, for example, issue a travel warning saying, well, Tunisia is a government that supports terrorism, or at the very least is incooperative in the combating of Islamic terrorism. And if you paint this kind of brush over a government, I'm pretty damn sure that they are more likely to cooperate in the future, because Tunisia is a government and a nation dependent on its tourism industry, and cutting off German tourism to Tunisia would most definitely hurt it quite a bit.
What do you think about, shifting gears a bit, there are a lot of people in the alt-right who are just, I guess, very enthusiastic about the prospect of some mass conflict, style of, basically a sort of a war for Europe. I mean, I would think that people these days would do everything they could to provide for a peaceful solution before it came to that. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I don't think that a war for our civilization is likely. I do believe that long-term speaking, that the shifts within public opinion will result in these people being sent back or going back on their own behalf. That's what I believe. At least that is what I am working on. I believe it is possible to get most of these people, to get these self-segregated Islamic communities of Europe out of Europe, to dissolve them and to bring them to go, either by means of deportation or by luring them back through pragmatic ways, by, for example, offering them money to go back, which seems to have worked on occasions.
Yeah, I hope so. There are a lot of people out there that actually want things to just explode and get really, really bad, and maybe that's the only way things can improve. I guess I'm pretty black-pilled on all of this.
Oh yeah, well, I'm black-pilled for the future. I think things have to get extremely much more worse before they can get any better.
Yeah.
Things will have to get really bad. And I don't mean that in a necessarily only violent sense. I don't mean that there will probably be more terrorist attacks. I also mean that the economic situation will deteriorate drastically.
Yeah. Well,
and it's kind of funny, isn't it, that we spent the last almost 10 years cutting back on our budgets and so forth all across Europe for the purpose of preventing another economic crisis, another economic drawback. And now we're facing an economic drawback despite the cutbacks due to the absolutely stupid social policies and immigration policies of our governments.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe these facts that some people deem to be hate facts will become more public, and I believe the thing that we can do is try our best to make the public more aware of these things. Facts like, for example, that in France, despite being 7.5% of the total population, Muslims make up 70% of the French prison population. Or that.
But as you just pointed out, and I pointed this out too, things generally need to get bad before people will react to things. I mean, bad is relative, of course, but as long as people can still surf the internet and eat pizza and hamburgers and go to the cinema, I mean, apart from the occasional truck of peace, people are not going to feel energized, in my humble opinion, to do very much about anything. I mean, you can inform them as much as you want, but they'll just sort of, shrug their shoulders and say, oh, okay, well, it didn't affect me.
I think a good example would be what brought the Thatcher administration into power. What brought the Thatcher administration into power in the United Kingdom wasn't necessarily, a continuous phase of economic decline. I mean, there was a continuous economic decline due to the state socialism. But the historic event that many people tend to forget in the UK was the winter of discontent, when coal miners, the truck drivers that transport petrol, the truck drivers that transport coal, and grave diggers went on a strike throughout almost the entire winter of 1979, with the result being that you couldn't even bury your relatives when they died. And it doesn't necessarily take, a continuous 2-3 years phase of just utter misery. All it takes to create enough energy for a kind of convulsion of revolutionary potential to overthrow the status quo is a few months of utter and complete misery, of utter chaos.
Yeah.
And if something like that happens, I believe there is the potential that the German people might vote for something that is more radical.
But what about something, I mean, I think the issue with the trucks of peace or, the axe attack, whatever, usually it only involves a small number of people. I mean, maybe 5 people die, maybe 10, maybe 20, maybe 30. What if hundreds of people died in one of these incidents? I wonder if that would be enough impetus Ansporn to get people to react.
The thing that changed in France, I mean, the one big, massive change in France, and people tend to often ignore it, is that the thing that I like to call the toxic alliance, which is the protective wing that the left has built over Islam, the continuous cuckoldry of the left towards Islam, has been broken in France. And people tend to ignore this, but it did happen. The French left is no longer making excuses for Islam. The French left is by now tackling Islam. And that was one of the... I don't know, would you consider that a small or a big change for a political sphere? I'm curious to ask you, because I wouldn't know how to judge it myself.
Too small to make a lasting difference, I think.
Yeah, that was the main, to me, that was the main change that came out of a year of bloodshed in France. Yeah. That was the main change that happened in France.
I'm convinced, actually, if I'm honest. I don't want it to happen, but, I mean, you'd need something like...
9/11. You probably
or in half an airport's blown up and 5,000 people. It's something really extreme, not... Stockholm, they killed 4 people. There were some injuries. Okay, because that's the kind of attitude that engenders some of these things we've heard from Mayor Khan, for example. That this is just part and parcel of living in a big city or something like that. Or some French politician, whose name I've since forgotten, mentioned. This is the sign of our times. This is just the way it is. It might be. I mean. If you go back to the 18th and early 19th century, sailing around the Mediterranean, you were quite likely to be attacked by Barbary pirates and taken into slavery. I mean, that was a sign of the times too. But we know that the generation, well, my parents, who were sort of the greatest generation in years, I guess, who were baby boomers, They lived through times that did not entail having to deal with these, albeit sporadic, but still dangerous attacks. So I think if you have something truly massive, and it's unfortunate that this is what I think is necessary, someone like Mayor Khan couldn't just say, well, half of Heathrow got blown up, but this is just part of the living in a
the thing is that our security apparatus in Germany is one of the best in Europe, and it will continuously repulse attacks like these. It will continuously, because it is one of the best in Europe, and it's something that we have to acknowledge. The amount of terrorist attacks that were prevented by the German security services is staggering. And they're doing a really good job, and it has to be lauded. What I think is more likely to happen is that we come to a situation that is similar to the Troubles in Northern Ireland. What people forget about France is that it's not just these terrorist attacks that occurred in France. It is also the fact that Jewish communities, they storm synagogues, like Muslims storming synagogues like 1930s German brown shirts. That they bash up gay couples that they see walking in the streets. They declare their Muslim ghettos to be gay-free zones and so forth. They attack women that don't veil up. There's also a lot of social consequences. And these social consequences are the more dangerous thing. And these social consequences, not the big terrorist attacks, but these social conflicts that are caused by Islamic self-segregation, are the main things, in my opinion, that sway voters. And that scenario, I believe, is far more likely to create change in attitudes than big terrorist attacks.
Well, self-segregation has always been a problem. It's never a good idea. Argue what you want, but a lot of the events of World War II, in my humble opinion, were due to self-imposed Jewish self-segregation. Of a different sort than the Islamic, but it doesn't lead to good results. It certainly estranges people. It's just that, once again,
it's not necessarily self-segregation alone. It's the hostility of one population group towards wider society. That's something, I live in a town I live in the middle of an immigrant quarter in my town, And all my neighbors are Russians. That's the thing.
Oh, right.
I'm not surrounded by Arabs. Everyone here is a Russian. I have a Russian store here which sells goods that are imported from Russia with weird sodas and stuff like that. The only exception that I have is a Polish neighbor. But everything here is Russian. Russian stores, Russian butcher, Russian groceries, Russian people everywhere. And they are kind of self-segregated. Segregation
every
is a
group
social
does
problem.
It's just that it's the consequences. I think of the groups that self-segregate, the Muslims potentially are the worst of them because
I self-segregate. I preserve my British ancestry. I preserve my British culture. I take very much pride in the fact that I'm half British, that I have this cultural connection to this island and its amazing, great culture and history. But the thing I don't do is I don't march through the streets of Munich.
I think there are degrees of self-segregation. I mean, I could argue I self-segregate too, but I'm able to move about German society pretty fluidly. I think, but that's
the thing I wanted to get to is the thing I don't do is I don't march through the streets of Munich and proclaim that everyone has to obey Her Majesty's laws. That's the main difference. We don't see our cultural backgrounds as some kind of political incentive, some kind of political movement. No, it's just part of who we are.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm one of the least attached to my background people out there. I mean, I'm mildly interested in it, but I think that is probably the main issue. The inflexibility of, well, I just don't see a kind of cultural assimilation ever taking place with Muslim communities.
Oh, it won't.
You get bits and pieces, I think, and really the problem is it's just too transformative.
It's not just too transformative. The thing that makes the big difference to me is that the Muslim community is entirely centered around the authority of the mosque and the authority of this backwards desert set of laws. I mean, the Russian community amongst which I live, I mean, it's a very religious community. They go to church every Saturday and they're very, but their life doesn't revolve around the Orthodox Church. Their life doesn't revolve around social laws coming out of Russia. Their lives revolve around life itself. These are people who their teenage daughters go on trips to Munich to go out drinking at night. They date Germans. Their teenage boys date German girls and so forth. This is a community that is very much part of the wider German society. You have German customers that go to that Russian store that I mentioned specifically because some of the fish that they sell is better than elsewhere. It's part of this big fabric of this society by now, and the Russian community is very much part of Germany now. You don't have that with the Muslim society. With the Muslim society in Germany, especially the Turks, kind of want to create a Turkey outside of Turkey here in Germany.
Yeah, it was Easter this past weekend, and as always, the honking of the horns, running the crescent moon. Yeah, it's just kind of for me, it's just something I can't really relate to because I'm pretty just unattached to all this sort of religious, ethnic, no religious background whatsoever or ethnic background. It just doesn't. I've never found it particularly interesting. So when people really just get up in your face about it, it kind of disturbs me. And
it's imposing. It's the imposition of that cultural background, which is happening with the Islamic community.
Yeah, and I think it definitely has happened with that, and it's happened, of course, with other groups of people. I think basically, my view, and people don't like to hear this, but I think tribalism, it's certainly a natural human tendency, but I don't think it's beneficial in the modern context. By that I mean people naturally aren't going to just accept a sort of egalitarian, libertarian view of the world. That's just not the way people are are wired. So I mean, I don't know. To be honest, I think it's we're just way past time. You're not going to get Turks to integrate completely or view themselves differently, or really anyone else for that matter. I mean, how many? I mean, I know you probably have a different view of this, but I mean, certain groups of Jews were in Europe for 2,000 years and still didn't want to integrate. So it's just.
Oh yeah. I think the best example of that is the Jewish community in Vienna. I mean, there's two big Jewish communities in the German-speaking world, and they kind of stand at opposite ends here. I mean, German Jews in general no longer exist. That's just a fact. Most Jews that are German and still exist have migrated to the United States and now live there. The Jewish communities in Germany are mainly Russian immigrant Jewish communities. A small percentage are German Jews that existed in Germany prior to the Second World War. And when you compare, for example, the Jewish community in Vienna with the Jewish community in Berlin, the Jewish community of Berlin is this progressive intellectual Jewish community.
Of course they're progressive. What else do you expect?
Yeah, because it's the swamp of Berlin. And
I think it's not. There are things about the alt-right. I mean, it's undeniable that if from an outside perspective, when you look at the overwhelming tendency of secular Jews, self-named secular Jews, to just favor progressive multiculturalist causes. There's some, there's some work on this by a guy named Kevin MacDonald. I don't know if you heard the name, but that's something that I've always thought is just very strange. A kind of, after all this time, just always, well, it's not strange because people are tribal, I get that, but that they just sort of integrated, but not completely.
Yeah, the thing about the Jewish communities of Germany is that they always adopted the local culture. They are, in many cases, they're kind of indistinguishable from them. Like I wanted to give Vienna as the next example, but another good example is Munich. The Munich Jewish community is extremely conservative. Very conservative. I mean, I don't know if you remember that incident when the migrant and refugee crisis occurred. I don't know which rabbi it was, the rabbi of Nuremberg or the rabbi of Munich, came out very vocally against opening borders, saying, "Oh, we're importing a mass number of anti-Semites here." And the irony of this case was that the bickering progressive leftist voices of Germany called him a Nazi. Which is, the irony of that seems to be lost on these people. But yeah, in many cases they adopted the local culture, and it would probably be fair to say that the Berlin Jews are mainly progressive leftists because of that.
That is an interesting feature of modern progressivism, which arguably was largely installed. I mean, I think it's undeniable by Jewish intellectuals. Not entirely, but there were many people who happen to call themselves that, and that the modern incarnation of it is more about sort of sympathy with brown-skinned people. So, if they originally they were trying to get rid of exclusionary features directed towards Jews, they sure fucked up, because it's completely gone awry there. It's not really work. It's just sort of it's Muslims and dark-skinned people usually
that are at the bottom of the progressive stack right now.
I
doesn't
suppose,
really help much.
Yeah. But I just think that this is just a problem that's been in Europe for just centuries and centuries. A lack of integration. I don't see a good way of solving it. The best case scenario is, people do their own things. I mean, I'm not inferring that, Jews who used to live in these shtetls, as they called them, were, up to nefarious purposes, but they certainly were. Half of them didn't speak Polish. They were living in their own little world. Okay, fair enough. But generally, this is not a good way to take society. But, I mean, even in a country such as Canada, the United States, where you supposedly have a well-integrated society, I don't really see that. I see people nominally speak the language, that's true, but I mean, I think that whatever identity European countries had, or the United States for that matter, has been lost. Whether that's a good or bad thing, I'll leave that for others to decide. But I know
I actually disagree with you that.
Might have finished, and then maybe you can tell me why you disagree. But when I think about an American identity, as we say, you're American. Well, I have a passport and I speak the language, but I feel no connection whatsoever. And even when I think of New York, which is my birthplace, I feel no, because I've come to realize over the years that it's so there's just nothing left. There's nothing that actually identifies you apart from some very superficial things like how you speak English or having a passport that really tells you anything. I mean, sure, you could infer from me being an American if you didn't know me that I'm some typical American from wherever, Kansas. It's unlikely, but I think, and the same things happen to Europe. I think whilst there are some features that define certain European countries still, not many people, I'd argue, feel their identity particularly strongly, I think. But go on, please. Why do you disagree?
I think I agree with you, actually, to a certain degree, because I think I misunderstood you in the beginning. Yes, we're living in a time where culture has been eroded over the course of 40 years, where culture has been deemed an irrelevance by progressive thinkers and so forth. But I believe we live in an age where people reassess their culture, reassess their identity. Now, I might be proven wrong over the course of the next 20 years. I do agree to that. But I do believe that we are living in an era where people start reassessing what it means to be French, reassessing what it means to be German.
There's definitely that. I mean, you could look at the alt-right. I mean, who knows if it'll be successful, but that sort of branch of thinking.
I don't just think that it comes from the alt-right. I think the alt-right and these right-wing parties have, however, succeeded in one fundamental thing, which is bring the question of identity back into the public conversation, and people will probably have the debates. Have you read the book by this? We talked about it before recording this. The French novelist.
Well, I told you that it's sitting on my shelf collecting dust, but I have it. I have not read it. A little introduction. Yeah, I was talking to Kraut about this before. So there's a famous, and perhaps a better way of putting it is infamous French novelist, Michele Whitbeck. He's put out a lot of novels in his time. I think his most famous, his first one, was L'extension du domaine de la lutte, so the extension, die Ausweitung der Kampfzone in German, and they had some weird, I think it was called whatever in English, the translation. In any event, he puts out these, so his most recent novel, which is now I think 2 years old, was about I think a professor in France in a fictional setting who just reckons that, Islam's such a powerful force, I might as well just give in. Not because he believes it, but because it's expedient and convenient. Mm-hmm. And there was an interview being conducted by a German journalist, and he was talking to him and saying, well, why is this so controversial? Why are you this sort of force in France that stirs controversy? Because a writer in Germany, a novelist in Germany writes a book, and nobody really cares. It's a book. Who cares? Anyway, I just would introduce that topic that way.
Yeah, the book is really great, and I really advise you to read it. There's this...
I will one day.
The background of it is that there is a far-right Front National candidate, and she wins the first round of elections, and
this is, of course, Marine Le Pen in disguise.
It's probably, Marine Le Pen in disguise. Yeah. And the other candidate who comes into the second round is a Muslim of some Muslim party thing, And everyone, of course, because of the Republican alliance to keep the far right out of office, votes for the Muslims, and the Muslim take over France. And there's this, it's just, the book tells the story of a Muslim takeover of France. And there's this very interesting scene in that book where he encounters the last Jew in France, who is a friend of his. And he's about to pack his bags and emigrate to Israel because, of course, of the increasing anti-Semitism that comes with having Muslims here. And the protagonist of the book speaks to his Jewish friend as he's about to leave and so forth. And then after the Jewish friend of his leaves, he has this thought going through his mind, which is, oh, wait, I don't have an Israel. And that single phrase, that kind of summarizes the entire dilemma that we in Europe find ourselves in with the migration and so forth. If you want to live in the German-speaking republic, in a German-speaking nation, what do you have as choice? You have Germany, you have Austria, you have Switzerland. The reaffirmation of identity, of a national and cultural identity, is kind of summarized in that phrase of that book. And to me, it's not just an alt-right thing, it's the books like this one by Whitbeck and so forth have reinvigorated, at the very least in France, and to a certain degree also in the Netherlands, a debate about what it means to be French, what it means to be Dutch, how culture, language, cultural practices and laws play into how we define ourselves as a people. And this debate has been strangled for 30 years, and I'm actually really happy that it is reappearing, because it is a debate to be had.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. I mean, I don't know how I best describe myself, some kind of pan-European. I've lived in a lot of different European countries, but I certainly regard Europe more as a home than I do the United States. But if things were to really go to shit, I mean, me not being Jewish, I could never go to Israel, obviously, but I might find some place in New England, some quiet town, and set up shop there, where I'm left alone. I think as a sort of refuge, I guess, but I definitely feel more at home in Europe. I don't want to go back to the United States, but there aren't that many options. I mean, I suppose the thing is, within the EU, every country is I wouldn't say that's the same, but a lot of the issues being faced in one country are the same as the issues being in another. Part of my interest of exploring Hungary in the not too distant future is, the fact that it is run differently to a lot of other countries, which, take that as you may. Some people find people like Orban, too extreme or whatever. I don't know why they think that. There's always Jobbik for that, but it's strange. I think I would agree with you. Some people, at least online, I don't see that in daily life very much. I see the average German getting irritated when
the conversation hasn't come to Germany yet.
No,
most definitely.
No. But maybe it has come to the Netherlands. It's been a while since I visited, and I've heard actually from whispers from friends, some Dutch people I know, that is a conversation that's being had. So it is possible. I just I don't know. It seems. I guess I'm skeptical about a lot of the stuff. Part of the problem is that how does one temper a kind of zeal for national identity or even ethnic identity without it becoming sort of fanatical? I think there's good precedent that it can move in an unhealthy direction potentially.
It can, but it can also be something refreshing and reasserting. And I believe it has on occasions. I think it has been very healthy for Britain, for example, during the 1980s. And it has been very healthy for the United States during the 1980s.
Well, I think Britain is largely lost. The Britain that everyone has known. I mean, they have a Muslim mayor. If you had told Churchill in the 40s or 50s that in 2017 you'd have Mayor Khan talking about, this is just part of living in a multicultural. I mean, he would have flipped his lid. It's not a. What does that even? Because once again, I think being British has become sort of meaningless. I think the alt-right does have a point when they say, that there's a kind of ethnic identity attached to things. I could move to Denmark or Norway, and they're very nice places, and then become completely immersed in the language, acquire the citizenship. I'll never be any of those things. At the end of the day, I'll always be a filthy Eastern European or Central European or whatever. But it's just I've lived in the UK before. I like the UK. I like the weather. I like rainy, cloudy weather. It's my favorite type. But I mean, I'd never, I'd never call myself British, even if I started, speaking old school, RP accent from the 1920s or something. It wouldn't strike me because I'm not. And I think
I had the exact opposite experience.
Kraut, I was actually thinking about you when this girl left this comment. I remember an exchange on a gaming forum of all things of a Turkish girl who grew up in Denmark, and she didn't really reveal much. I said, well, I asked where she was from. So, I'm a Turkish resident in Denmark. I said, what? And she's Turkish by blood, Danish by residence. And I could instantly tell in that exchange that she didn't identify as a Danish person.
A Danish, yeah.
Even though she said she liked things about Denmark. And I think you get the same. I mean, if you ask the typical Pakistani or Turkish person, say in Britain or in Germany, they're not going to say I'm
British. They're going to say I'm Pakistani. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I get what you mean. I get what you mean.
I mean, I think this is just something that people need to be honest about, because you hear it from they themselves, and I think that people who maintain the Turks are a great example of this in several countries. The Netherlands, they're pretty prominent there too. Kind of separate identity, because you remember the controversy of Erdogan petitioning people outside of Turkey.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of support for him in the Netherlands, for this action, even though it was illegal. And I think this kind of dual identity, if you want to call it, or multiple identity, it not only is it confusing, it's really impractical. Because it leads to conflict. It leads to conflicts of interest. I mean, if you want to, I mean, I know you disagree with me, but I think if you observe,
I actually don't. I do believe you're right.
Right.
I think you're right.
So it leads to conflict. It's why it's not a good, I think, ultimately a good thing. Now, I'm not a fanatic categorically opposed to someone saying, well, I grew up here, I absorbed the culture, but I'm not whatever. But it's just, I just don't think it. The evidence around me suggests that it's not working out particularly well, and I mean, I know we disagree on this, but I think the cultural neuroticism that you can witness in many Jews is born of this too. Maintaining for centuries a separate identity, that really instead of just saying, well, we're here, we're just going to be part of this. Now you could argue that that is, I guess Jews would argue that had contributed to the preservation of their culture, but at what cost? There's no doubt that the self-imposed segregation and estrangement that they practice contributed to some of the things that happened during World War II, and it's because that just is not a healthy practice, especially when you've been in Europe for 2 millennia. So it's anyway, it's another example of something that has not historically worked very well, I think.
The point where I disagree with you is that I believe that Islamic self-segregation is a completely beast within its own, a different kind of beast. That the kind of dual identity, I mean, I have a dual identity. I would even argue that I have a triple identity to a certain degree. I can go, and the thing is, I don't necessarily, I wouldn't say I live in Germany, but I'm British. I wouldn't say I live in Britain, but I'm German. I wouldn't say I live in Austria, but I'm German. I live in Austria, but I'm British. I live in Germany, but I'm Austrian, and so forth. To me, I had this conversation with a friend of mine who lives in Berlin, who told me that every time she is abroad, she gets this longing to be back in Berlin, and that for her, the most heartwarming thing in life is when she comes home from a long trip abroad and she sees the giant TV tower. She has this sense of home,
I used to live in Berlin years ago. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, the thing is, I have that same thing. I really do. But I have it with completely different parts, with places where I grew up. I I actually spent most of my childhood in England, not in England, but in Cardiff in Wales. And every time I hear about Caerphilly Castle, there's this big castle in Cardiff with a big park around it. Every time I see pictures of it, I get this warm kind of feeling in my chest. I get this homely feeling because I spent a lot of time there. And every time I, for example, see pictures of Oldenburg, where I lived for quite a while,
all the way up
I
to
also
the north,
yeah, and Vienna as well. Vienna also gives me a warm feeling whenever I see it. It's just, to me, my multiple ethnic national background, it didn't reserve for me a sense of segregation. It reserved for me a sense of belonging. And that belonging did not limit me. That's the thing about having multiple facets within your identity. I believe there's an aspect of self-segregation that can occur, but the self-segregation that we, for example, see happening within the Islamic communities is far different to any kind of preservation of culture, because I believe what Russian communities in Germany are doing, for example, is merely a preservation of their culture. They don't segregate, because the thing that makes it self-segregation to me is the active hostility towards wider society, the rejection of wider society, and even conflict with wider society. And I do not, we do not have Russian riots in Germany. We do not have Russian terrorist attacks. We do not have Russians attempting to blow things up in Germany. We don't have Russians here trying to undermine the legal system and trying to undermine social institutions to impose some sort of Russian set of values. No, the Russians here are, in fact, I don't know if you would agree with me on this, and I'll admit first off that this is mainly based on my personal experience with the Russians that I know. The Russians have been a great contribution to our society. Russian immigration has been great for us. The Russians are hardworking, and it might have to do with the fact that most Russian immigrants in Germany come not out of urban areas, but out of these, lower Moscow, southern Moscow urban areas. A lot of Russians, a lot of people don't know this, are actually from Kazakhstan, ethnic Russians from Kazakhstan, urban farmer types, and hardworking, decent, very conservative.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. Immigration, it always depends on where the people are from. So you can
absolutely. That's what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to say. And the Islamic immigration to Europe has been nothing short of a disaster, specifically because of that hostility that you will hardly find within other immigration groups. I mean, when was the last time you saw a Islamic woman dating a German man? Have you ever seen that before anywhere in your life? It doesn't exist.
I see. An Islamic woman dating. I saw that a couple of weeks ago. Well, she was brown skinned. I don't know if she was a Muslim. Yeah, no, she did. She was wearing a veil, and he looked German, sort of. So.
Well, but it is still something that hardly ever happens.
Oh yeah, certainly not.
Yeah. I mean, I will admit that there are some exceptions, but in total, they don't even marry with native Germans. They hardly mingle with native Germans. And when they engage within wider society, they do so on the behalf of what can I get from my cultural collective. They don't think on an individual basis. Culture for them is not an individual identity thing. It's not something that they build for themselves. It's something that they build for a collective. And that collective attitude is something that we do not have. And that most other migrant groups don't have. And yeah, as I mentioned before, that kind of collective debate is dripping up again with the reassessment of identity. But in terms of the difference between Muslims and us, there's a wider hostility coming out of the Muslim migrant communities.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of right. It's the issue of our time.
I apologize for my snotting. My nose started running for some weird reason.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I like hot. Yeah, and I guess, I mean, for me, I don't, because I'm a weirdo, I don't really get a warm feeling looking at any place. But I understand that a lot of people, they do have that. They have a pronounced sense of identity. I think my issue, I guess, that I would have with Islam is it just generally doesn't leave you alone. It doesn't give you breathing space. I mean,
my general problem with Islam, and I get a lot of fucking flack for that. I mean, the controversial aspect that you mentioned about me, I'm pretty much branded a racist by now, because I look at Islam itself, and it's a phrase I occasionally say. I make very controversial statements. I do actually believe that Islam has to be neutered and castrated and made to bow before the rest of the world. Not just because we have to protect ourselves, but to protect humanity at large. And it's something that I fundamentally believe in. I don't just look at Islam and see it as a threat to us. I see it as a threat to the entire of human civilization.
Well, I mean, in some fundamental sense, it is a threat to the entirety of human civilization. But I think that in order to, well, the problem, I've said this in previous videos. I mean, you just have to say no. We can't have this. Now it's too late. You're not going to roll back the clock in the United Kingdom, for example. I don't think.
I think you can actually. I think it is capable. I don't think it is too
late.
But
no. I'll tell you why I'm saying that. So all these Pakistani people born in Britain with this sort of mixed identity, I reckon the vast majority of them wouldn't want to go live in Islamabad. They want all of the perks of living in the misty realm of Britain, but at the same time maintain their own whatever inbreeding community. It's that eternal dilemma, I think, for many people who self-segregate. This is just recurrent throughout history, I think, of groups of people who want the perks and benefits of living in country X, but don't really want to fully integrate into country X. And so, it's just not going to happen, because it's much more pleasant to live in the United Kingdom than it is in Pakistan, for example.
My Pakistani solution might sound very ridiculous and radical to you. I believe the solution to the Pakistani problem is for the Indian Republic to take over Pakistan, if necessary by means of war. I do actually fundamentally believe that Pakistan is a nation that isn't supposed to fucking exist. It's a tumor on the globe. It's a boiling, festering boil on the face of humanity. And my solution to the Pakistani problem, including the migrant problem, is for India to take it over. I believe that a lot of people from Pakistan originally would go back to the Indian subcontinent if India were to take it over. There's also a significant difference between the Muslims from India and the Muslims from Pakistan. A significant difference in the cultural attitudes. Yeah, sure, India is not a glowing beacon of humanity and so forth. I am not claiming that. But I do believe that the Pakistani problem would be solved with an Indian takeover of Pakistan. Even here in Europe to a certain degree. It's a completely different topic also, by the way. It's drifting into something.
Yeah. No, that's not an issue, but yeah, I think there are obviously multiple issues. We covered the identity angle, talked about the AFD, and I think the French election, whatever the outcome will be, interesting. As a final note, I've mentioned this before on my channel, that I have a concern that if these people don't, if these so-called right-wing leaders, they're not right-wing, but whatever, people like Le Pen, if they're not elected, they might be setting the ground for something far more radical later on, which is to say, I mean, I talked with a French guy and some other, she's called the far right. Never mind the stuff we talked about with their socialist policies, but hey. But also just, if people think the AFD are bad, or, Geert Wilders, or all these people, I mean, that's really nothing. If things really shit really hits the fan, then people get desperate. I mean, we have historical precedent for this. So if they think the things they're proposing and suggesting are bad, well, it could get a lot worse than that. And so I actually think that electing these people would be a better long-term solution than waiting maybe 20 years for everything to fall apart, and then we get somebody who is truly maybe fascist, and I know a lot of alt-right people would think that's great, but whatever. I'll assume for the sake of argument that it's not a good thing. Who will really want war or real conflict and bloodshed, and so people's apathy isn't helping here, and the fact that they just want to keep on electing status quo, well, that's not helping either. And so I'm a bit troubled by people's unwillingness to see it in these terms. People have forgotten about history, of course, because for most people, especially of this generation, history started, I don't know, when the internet came online or something. So, if things get really bad, humans have a natural tendency to elect leaders that are frankly not going to be, they're going to be a lot worse than what's being presented, and that's one of my major long-term concerns. I mean, so I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
I guess what is more likely to happen is that things get worse, and that people like the AFD will stand there in the end and say, "We told you so," and we'll get elected on that single phrase. I don't believe that something more radical than the AFD is likely to turn up. Precisely because the AFD is a voice that has been missing from the German political discourse for such a long time. But yeah, I think I do agree with you that things are going to get worse. Things are going to get really worse.
Yeah.
What a nice black pill to end this podcast.
Well, I have experienced far worse black pills. There's a guy you should check out, because I know you're like you like diversity. You like diverse views. If you don't know him, is Reactionary Expat. He's a neo-reactionary. Well,
good,
I don't know if
you
you
write
call him
that down.
Reactionary Expat. He's very black-pilled and he's very reactionary. Loose affiliations with the alt-right, but not part of the alt-right per se, since he's committed the cardinal sin of race mixing. I think his wife is Taiwanese, so yeah. Anyway,
I should thank you. I really should thank you for one thing, which is
what's that?
showing me Coltane, to who I subscribe, and everyone watching this
all praise
to
mighty Lord Coltane. Yes.
Everyone watching this should subscribe to Coltane. He's an amazing channel. I really enjoy watching his content.
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine. We all love Coltane. When he's not intoxicated, at least. He's pretty unbearable when he's drunk. But yeah, apart from that.
And I bought this gear here, this instrument, and I might going to use it for a little effect at the end.
But yeah, I mean, check out Reactionary Expat for different views on stuff. I really enjoy stuff, even if I'm going
to look his channel up. I'm definitely going to watch some of his videos.
Yeah, he's very slow paced. I really enjoy his delivery. And remember, of all the people on the left in the whole Sargon crowd, Kraut and Tea is probably the most open-minded and the best to talk to. So I'd like to thank him for being here.
No problem.
Offering
anytime again.
His views, and I want to appreciate his open-mindedness and express that publicly. And I guess if you don't know him, go on over his channel. It's pretty big, and he covers a lot of things, politics, current events. My favorite video of yours to date is still the video where you commented on communism and art. That was a really good one.
And it's something that came true, because I noticed that some mainstream publications, I think, I don't know which paper it was, but it was a British paper that wrote an article titled "The New Socialist Realism," and I kind of was a proud moment for me, because I have the feeling that the author saw my video and turned out to be validated.
Oh, nice. That was a really, really great video. So everyone, go check out his channel if it's of interest to you. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in. More content to come, in all likelihood, if I'm still alive, and I will check you out later. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.